Back in January I dug a 65-metre trench to connect up a new car charger from the garage to our house. I also laid a new water pipe in the trench, just in case we ever decided to try and convert the garage. The trench was still open at the bottom of the garden, so I thought now would be a good time to make the final connection of the water pipe to the mains, and in the process gravel over the path at the back of the house that gets muddy in the winter. I thought it would be an easy job. How wrong I was. Today I'll be showing you the problems with a job like this, where I went wrong, the obstacles I came up against, and what I've learned from this part of the dig, in the hope that it helps you if you're planning something similar. So I started this job armed with my trusty mattock pick, the same thing I used when I dug the decking down at the bottom of the garden. And also that I used when I tried to dig the trench at the top of the garden for the car charger. And what I have realised is that I never learn from one project to another, because as you can see in this clip here, it was incredibly slow going. I immediately hit loads of stones underground. I don't know what happens on all these builds over the years, but one contractor after another buries the stones, grit, gravel, everything that they were using, and that's the same here. It looks reasonably soft, but this is not topsoil. You've only got to look here to see what I've been pulling up out of the ground. I've got a nice old drain there I had to get through, and down here at the bottom of the garden we've got an entire wall buried below the surface. The other thing I realised after starting was I hadn't made any plans as to where I was going to put all the soil that I was excavating. So I set up this very DIY style soil sifter on my wheelbarrow so that I could sift the decent soil, the topsoil, from all the stones and gravel and everything else, in the hope that I could then use that topsoil and spread it on the garden, because that trench that I dug in January when the ground was really soft had left all sorts of divots and holes in the lawn, which at some point I'm going to have to level. But that's all well and good, but it's not really scratching the edges. What I realised is I needed some mechanical help, so I hired a micro digger from a local company, and a few days later it arrived and I could really get cracking on the digging, or so I thought. These micro diggers, I've never used one before. The digger that you saw in the previous clip was a 3.5 ton digger I borrowed from a mate, but these micro diggers are fantastic. Obviously you've got tracks that can shrink inwards so that you can get them through doorways, and they're powerful enough to dig foundations. And I even pulled out a couple of rotten tree stumps with it. But sadly on this job it's only been of limited use. I say limited, I mean it dug a reasonable chunk of that trench there, which was an enormous help, but it was of limited use because what I didn't realise was just how many services there were below the path. So looking at the trench from the bottom of the garden, we've got two pipes here, two brown plastic pipes with some protective concrete above. Looks fine now excavated, but this gives you a better idea what I was having to dig through. Which take the foul water from the toilets and the grey water, the rainwater, from the roof. The contractor who installed this should not have done this above ground section in brown plastic because it fades with the UV, but we'll come on to him a bit further in a minute. I also had this old redundant pipe lower down to hack through. Further along the trench, I had another two pipes to dig underneath, again taking soil and grey water. And then there was this little beauty, the water main. Now, any of you who've been following my Instagram account the last couple of weeks will have heard me whinging about the placement of this water pipe. When I had my new septic tank fitted several years ago at the bottom of the garden, I paid a contractor to install that tank and also to replace the existing services, namely the soil pipes and the drainage pipes off the roof. At the same time as doing all the digging, he ruptured the water main and so replaced it with a new MDPE water pipe from where the main came into the house at the bottom of the garden up to here. And you can see here where my initial digging revealed where the water main goes in under the kitchen floor. Now, I don't know about you, I'm obviously not an expert on all of this, but what I have realised in the course of doing all this digging is that water mains have to be 750 millimeters minimum below the surface, ideally protected with this warning tape. But my new water pipe was only 200 millimeters maximum below the path, and as you can see here in this clip, I snagged it as I was excavating with the micro digger, which by the way I was doing very carefully because I knew the water main was on the course that I was digging. I just didn't realise it would be anywhere near that close to the surface. Now a few people on Instagram have pointed out this week that what I should have been doing when I was digging with the micro digger is keep the teeth of the bucket horizontal as I drag it back through the soil. Obviously I wasn't doing that, but what I was doing was being incredibly careful, and I wasn't scooping with the bucket, I was literally dragging along, and it was in the process that I did that I snagged the water main. Thank God I didn't rupture it, because my water pressure here is insane. It's about 7 bar, probably more, so there would have been an absolute geyser had I gone through it, with no means of capping that off, because where I was digging was on the other side, on the main side of the stopcock. So my advice to you is, if you are doing this sort of digging and you're not sure where the water main is, have yourself one of these tools handy just in case you have to do an emergency clamping of the pipe of the water main. Now what the contractor had done was lag the MDPE pipe and also put it inside a perforated land drain. I suppose because knowing that he wasn't sinking it to the right level, he was trying to make sure it didn't freeze in the winter. But I was obviously understandably aggrieved because I paid a lot of money, about 15-16 grand, to have the septic tank and all of the additional works carried out as part of that project. But I thought, to hell with that, he didn't do it properly, I am going to do it properly. I want to dig my new trench to 750 mil down, and I set about doing this with a combination of that micro digger, using that as the brute force tool in the areas where I was pretty confident that there wasn't too much danger of any surfaces being there, and where I knew there were surfaces I proceeded a lot more carefully with my mattock pick, which has been brilliant over the years. And I even used a couple of trowels and this tool, which I bought from Screwfix, which actually, although initially I was a bit disappointed at its sort of digging power, I've got to say it's been a fantastic little tool on this job, particularly where you need to get underneath the pipes, as I had to do here, which was arguably the most fiddly part of the dig itself, and also when I had to dig carefully around the water main to make the new connections. I also used my Mac Allister concrete breaker to get through concrete and those underground bricks you saw earlier. I also had another quite amusing issue, having dug a lot of the trench work. Don't forget, I actually initially drove the digger down this section of the path. I realised I had no means of getting the digger out when 2 days later I had to hand it back to the hire company. So what I had to do was unfortunately demolish a stretch of my hedge just here to get the digger out and up in the field next to the house. Not too fussed about that. Here, there's my hot tub, which I've had to turn off because of the price of electricity at the moment. Not too much of an issue, because at some point I need to finish building this fence, because all of this part of the hedge here has been attacked by ivy. Now what's crazy about this property is, from about 500 mil down, there's this mad seam of, well, basically builder's sand. So it was pretty straightforward for the old trench, bedding the various cables and water pipe in this lovely builder's sand effectively. But for the new section I've been talking about today that I've just dug, there's a lot of rocks and gravel, and I've developed a renewed respect for the regulations on bedding in these sort of surfaces since analysing the water main when I was digging it up, because as you can see from these visuals here, there was a lot of sand and rocks around the pipe that my contractor put in. He had lagged it, but the lagging had been torn when he put it in, and he just casually overlaid it. And actually when I was digging it, I found a lot of stones and sort of larger rocks sort of really pushing up against that pipe, because don't forget, when you sort of start compacting the trench, everything gets compressed together. So with that in mind, I'll be encasing the MDPE water pipe in soft sand, and I'll also be ordering some pea gravel to replace the pea gravel that I had to dig away around the brown plastic. And also, as a precaution, I'm going to contact my local water utility company to check that they don't need to do an inspection before I fill in the trench. I've also ordered some Type 1 aggregate and some gravel for the path, but more on that in next week's video. So now to the final job, threading the 25mm MDPE pipe into the newly dug trench and connecting up the water main to the new pipe that goes up to the garage. I bought these Plasson 90-degree compression tees from my local farm DIY supply shop. The first one I fitted with a blanking plug so that I could connect another line into it should I ever decide to install water further down the garden. And the second, after switching off the mains supply, I connected up to the pipe that comes off the water main that supplies an outdoor tap. I used my reciprocating saw to cut through the pipe and also a miter saw to get a really clean 90-degree cut, deburring the pipe with some 120 grit sandpaper before pushing in inserts to strengthen the pipe when under compression. Plasson say the 25mm fittings can simply be hand tightened, and my experience using this is that there is no need to use any tools to further tighten the fitting. Hand tight. And I've relagged the pipe down to the point where it's 750mm deep. I had a near escape with one of the nuts on the compression fitting, which it looks like I managed to sever into with my mattock pick, but luckily I had a spare one that I could replace it with. At the other end of the water pipe up at the garage, I fitted a wall plate elbow to the garage wall, marking the screw holes with a brilliant marksman pen. And after drilling 4 7mm diameter holes for brown plugs, I fixed the wall plate elbow in place with some 4x40mm exterior tight outdoor screws, and then applied a fair amount of PTFE tape to the brass reducer and brass tap thread before screwing these into place, because without this the tap was not in the right orientation. I then wrapped the pipe in this thick lagging and may at some stage fit a wooden surround to the tap, just to make the whole thing look better, and the moment of truth, testing the tap. And lo and behold, the water came surging out after a matter of seconds. Yes! So that's it for another week. I've got to say, this has been a really tough challenge. Whether we should be doing these things single-handed, I don't know. I've just about got there in the end, and at times I've got pretty demoralised with this one. But what I've really found interesting about this job is just the learning curve, as per usual when we embark on these DIY challenges. I've never used any of those Plasson compression fittings before, but that's another one to tick off the list. Sorry about that, I live near a busy road. So I hope you found it in some way useful. It might not get a lot of views because it's one of those vids that doesn't fit squarely into any particular category. But you know, my ethos has always been to video stuff as it happens at the house, and this is another example of that. In my next video on this, it might not be my next video on the channel, I'll be showing you the process of repathing, laying a new path at the back of the house. If it wasn't for having a YouTube channel, I probably would have shoved a load of weed matting down and some gravel, but with the sort of need to do these things properly and also the slope of the path, I'm looking into getting some grid mesh and really going to town on this, because again, as part of the learning curve, I'll be using any techniques that I learned from this on the path at the front of the house, which urgently needs replacing. But it might not be next weekend, because the problem I've got is, having dug that trench down the middle of the path, there's going to be a lot of slumping going on once I've filled the trench, even if I properly compact it. So I'm probably going to have to leave that for a few weeks for it to settle before I lay the path. And of course I've got the potential inspection that might be required by the water utility company. So keep an eye out for that vid. It will happen hopefully sooner rather than later. So thanks again for watching today. I'll post links to everything I've referred to today as usual in the description below the video, which of course you can access on your smartphone by clicking on the little arrow, and on your PC by clicking on the show more button. And of course, if you're new to this channel, it would mean a huge amount to me to have you subscribe. You can do that by clicking on the link here, and don't forget to click the bell notification icon so you get notified of all my future uploads. See you soon.